today, we're diving into one of the most unique economic stories you'll ever hear. We're talking about India's temple economy. Now, when you think of a temple, you're probably thinking of spirituality, right? Well, what if I told you that these institutions are also managing assets that could give some of the world's biggest investment funds a run for their money?
So let's just start with this question right here. What if a spiritual center was also a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Because honestly, that's really the best way to frame this. These aren't just places of worship. They are massive economic engines, complete with their own incredibly complex balance sheets.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the sacred balance sheet itself. Then we'll meet the giants of this economy. We'll follow the money in and see the mission it funds on the way out. We'll also get into the huge dilemma of all this locked-up wealth, figure out who's in charge, and finally, take a peek at what the future might hold.
Okay, first up, the sacred balance sheet. Let's really get our heads around the foundations of this entire system.
You know, this whole thing really hinges on one fascinating, absolutely crucial legal idea: the deity as a juristic person. So in India, the main god or goddess of a temple is legally recognized as a person, kind of like how a company is a legal entity. This means the deity can own property, land, and all that wealth. And this is so important because it means the treasure isn't just a pile of donations. Legally, it's the deity's own private property, which, as you can imagine, makes it very, very hard to touch.
And what kind of assets are we even talking about here? Well, it's an incredibly diverse portfolio. You've got the obvious stuff: gold, precious metals, priceless jewels. Then you have huge amounts of cash donations and massive bank deposits. But it doesn't stop there. We're also talking about vast amounts of land, both farmland and prime city real estate. And maybe most interesting of all, you have these ancient artifacts, which you can almost think of as frozen capital. I mean, they're culturally priceless, but you can't exactly take them down to the bank.
Now let's see how all of this builds up to some truly mind-boggling numbers. It's time to look at the real giants of this economy.
Okay, just take a look at the scale and, more importantly, the variety here. You've got the Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple with wealth pegged at over $22 billion, most of which is ancient gold just sitting in vaults. Then you contrast that with Tirumala Tirupati, or TTD, with assets around 3 lakh crore rupees, that's 3 trillion rupees, which is way more liquid, made up of gold, bank deposits, and land. Then you have places like Shirdi, known for its huge annual cash flow, and the Jagannath Temple, whose wealth is almost impossible to quantify but includes, get this, over 60,000 acres of land.
And to really hammer home the scale, just one trust, Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam, or TTD, has an estimated net worth of 3 lakh crore rupees. In the US dollars, that's over $35 billion. This isn't just a religious institution, it is an absolute financial powerhouse.
So, with all this incredible wealth, you've got to ask, where does it all come from? And maybe more importantly, where does it all go? Let's trace the flow of this sacred capital.
This chart for TDD gives us a fantastic snapshot of their income. The biggest slice, no surprise, comes from the hundi, which is the donation box for devotees. But check this out. Another huge chunk, about 34%, comes just from the interest on their bank deposits. And about 21% is from asset monetization, which covers everything from selling their famous Laddu sweets to auctioning off donated human hair, which is a multi-million-dollar business all on its own.
So there's this common idea that all this money is just hoarded away, right? But for active temple boards like TTD, that couldn't be further from the truth. They basically operate as a massive social safety net. They run state-of-the-art hospitals with free or super cheap care. They fund universities and schools. They run these incredible Annadamam programs, which are free kitchens that feed literally millions of people. They even help fund local infrastructure projects and restore smaller temples out in rural areas.
And to put that into perspective, just think about this. The Golden Temple in Amritsar, by itself, serves free hot meals to around 100,000 people every single day. This isn't some small-time charity kitchen. It's a logistical marvel, and it's all funded by the temple's ecosystem.
But all of that brings us to the core conflict of this story, the billion-dollar dilemma. It's this massive tension between the wealth that does stay locked away and the active, liquid money that's being put to work.
This whole debate just exploded onto the world stage back in 2011. Under orders from the Supreme Court, these ancient, sealed vaults at the Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple in Kerala were opened, and what they found inside was a treasure trove of gold, diamonds, and artifacts estimated to be worth more than $22 billion.
And this slide right here perfectly lays out the two completely different models. On one side, you have Padmanabhaswamy. Here, the wealth is seen as priceless cultural heritage. It's the deity's legal property, and it's so important that the Supreme Court itself is overseeing it. But on the other side, you have TTD. Their wealth is liquid assets, cash, gold, financial deposits, and it's actively managed by a modern board specifically to fuel that massive charity machine we talked about.
This really gets to a deep philosophical question about ownership. The historian K.N. Ganesh puts it perfectly. Ultimately, whether described as divine wealth or social wealth, this wealth belongs to the people as the proceeds of their labor. It's such a powerful idea that frames this whole debate. Is this the deity's private treasure, or is it a nation's shared inheritance?
So, of course, this leads us to the big question of who's in charge. Who actually manages the god's wealth, and what are the controversies that come with it?
Well, it's a system with a few different layers. On the ground level, you've got the temple trusts themselves. These are the internal groups managing the day-to-day. Then, in a lot of states, you have government departments, usually called something like the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments, or HR&CE boards, that oversee the administration and the money. And at the very top, for the really big disputes, the Supreme Court of India often steps in to provide that final legal oversight.
And this is where things get really contentious. State governments often charge these temples administrative fees for their supervision. And this has kicked off some really intense debates about just how much control the state should have over religious money. People are asking, does this interfere with their autonomy? And should a secular government really be managing and profiting from religious institutions?
So where's all this heading? Let's take a look at the temples of tomorrow and the future of this pretty incredible sacred economy.
Well, the path forward seems to be pointing in a few key directions. There's a big push to professionalize the temple boards, bringing in actual experts in finance and management. There's also a growing demand from the public for way more transparency and accountability. The main goal seems to be figuring out how to better use these immense resources for sustainable development, while, and this is the tricky part, balancing the need to preserve priceless history with the very real economic needs of a modern country.
And really, that leaves us with the one question at the heart of this entire explainer. How do you balance preserving a priceless past with funding a nation's future? There are no easy answers here, but that single question is what lies at the very core of India's sacred balance sheet.